Have you ever had the experience of feeling like you're just stuck in your head and you just can't get out of it? You've got thoughts swirling around, they're either going really fast or you're stuck thinking about them. You can't seem to get your brain to think about anything else, and you're just starting to feel really anxious and really stressed, and that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You're not alone if this is happening to you. What's going on in your brain are what are called unhelpful thinking styles, and we're going to talk about what they are in this video. The first step to be able to make changes is to understand what's going on. This video is going to give you information about what unhelpful thinking styles are so that you can recognize them when they're happening to you. There is a whole bunch of different kinds of unhelpful thinking styles. We're going to go over all of these one by one. You can find this particular worksheet at psychology.tools on the internet. All or nothing thinking is thinking things are either this or that. This is also sometimes referred to as black and white thinking. It's thinking that something is an extreme. It's either this whole thing over here or it's that whole thing over there. So examples are, if I'm not perfect, I have failed. Either I do it right or I don't do it at all. The problem with this line of thinking is that most of life exists somewhere in between those extremes of thought. Overgeneralizing is seeing a pattern based upon a single event or being overly broad in the conclusions that we draw. So for example, I got one bad math grade. Makes me think I am horrible at math. I can't do it. I'm never going to pass this class. That's overgeneralizing based on one test. In reality, what that test score is telling me is I didn't understand some material and I probably need to go in for some extra help. Other examples are thinking everything is always rubbish. Nothing good ever happens. You'll notice that the words being used in overgeneralizing are exaggerating. A mental filter, unhelpful thinking style, is when your brain is only paying attention to certain types of evidence, meaning things like you're only noticing your failures, but you're not seeing your successes. It's kind of like thinking that particular thing doesn't count because it doesn't fit into a category. Similar to a mental filter, but a little bit different, is what's called disqualifying the positive. This is where you discount the good things that have happened or that you have done for some reason or another, meaning that doesn't count. So it's been a horrible day, and yeah, this good thing happened, but that doesn't count because everything else was bad. I believe that I am a horrible student in this particular subject, and so even though I just got some really good feedback from my professor, that doesn't count. Having a disqualifying the positive, unhelpful thinking style means that you're not taking into account the whole picture in any situation. Jumping to the conclusions is the next one we're going to talk about. There are two basic types of this one. When we jump to conclusions, we're either mind reading, imagining we know what someone else is thinking. The problem with this is unless someone actually comes out and tells us exactly what they're thinking, we really have no way of knowing. True, when we know someone well or we're good at understanding communication, including things like body language and facial expression as well as tone of voice, we can get pretty good at making educated guesses. But it's still only a guess. Unless someone comes out and tells us exactly what's going on in their head, we really have no way of knowing. The other type of jumping to conclusion is what's called fortune telling, so believing that you can predict the future. Kind of like those thoughts of saying, I know that this is going to be how it's going to turn out. This situation is absolutely going to work out this way. Problem with that, again, that's in the future. We're not there yet. And as we talked about with that idea of absolute thinking earlier, that all or nothing thinking, when we jump to conclusions, we're picking out one possible outcome and thinking and behaving as though it's going to be the only possible outcome. In reality, there's probably about 1 million different possibilities for outcomes in situations if we really stop to think about it. Magnification and minimization. Magnification is also sometimes known as catastrophizing. This is where we blow things out of proportion. We make them seem bigger than they actually are. Or minimization, which is inappropriately shrinking something to make it seem like it's less important. Emotional reasoning is an unhelpful thinking style that probably happens more often than we're aware of. This is where we assume that because we feel a certain way, what we think must be true. I feel embarrassed, so I must be an idiot. I feel like I'm right in this situation, which makes everybody else wrong. Having that thought means that we've stopped the possibility of figuring out a solution to a situation, or we're just really not helping ourselves to think clearly in a situation. When we assume something, it's not necessarily true. When we are able to get out of our heads, calm our emotions down, we might be able to realize that, yes, this was a situation, for example, that I felt really embarrassed in that it happened, but that doesn't make me an idiot. It just means that I did something that in that moment felt embarrassing. Shoulds, coulds, woulds, these are what are called critical words. Other examples of critical words are must or ought. These words can make us feel guilty or like we have already failed. These also are very, very, very common thoughts where we end up kind of getting stuck in this line of thinking that only serves to make us feel more guilty, more anxious, more depressed, more stressed. Using critical words towards ourselves is not the greatest way of thinking because it's also not very accurate. There is absolutely a place in the English language for the words should, could, would, must, or ought. When you notice that you've got these thoughts floating around in your head where you're saying, I should be doing this, if I could have done that, I would have done this, or if I would have done this, I must be doing this, what you need to do is kind of slow down. Because while yes, sometimes those thoughts might tell you that there is something that you should be doing. For example, if you have an exam coming up, yes, you should study for that exam. However, most often when we have these words in thoughts, they're not really helping us. And all that they're serving to do is increasing that stress and anxiety. If we apply shoulds to other people, the result can also be frustration. Oh, they should have done it this way. Well, not necessarily. So this is an example of an unhelpful thinking style that is very common for most of us. Labeling is another unhelpful thinking style that happens a lot. When we label, we're either assigning a label to ourselves or we're assigning a label to other people. I'm a loser. I'm completely useless. They're such an idiot. Labeling of either ourselves or someone else does not help because as soon as that label applies, we stop thinking positively about something. It's also a sign, if we're thinking about ourselves, of internalization. So, for example, I didn't do well on this math test. I'm a loser. I've labeled myself that, which means that I'm probably going to start thinking thoughts that are not going to help me build my confidence ability to do anything in math. It also means that I'm going to really start thinking of myself in that way across a lot of other situations. Labels don't help. There are certain times where labels can be helpful in categorization. You'll see them used a lot in healthcare, in medical settings, in science settings, and there is a place for labels. But what we need to be really careful of is we don't stop there. A label can be useful in language because it gives everybody an understanding of what something is. What that label means to this person, theoretically, is what it also means to somebody else. But the problem is when we start thinking with unhelpful thinking styles and we start labeling kind of across the board, we box things in. And when we box things in, we miss the opportunity to really build creative solutions and really build connections with other people. The last unhelpful thinking style is something called personalization. This is a thought of, this is my fault. It's blaming yourself or taking responsibility for something that wasn't completely your thought or your fault. Conversely, blaming other people for something that was not their fault. In every situation that we're in or that somebody else is in, we have a responsibility for our thoughts, our feelings, our actions. It's really important that when you're looking at a situation where you're involved and where other people are involved, that you look at things from the perspective of understanding what your responsibility is and where your responsibility ends. Taking more responsibility than actually belongs to you is unhelpful. Opposite of that, thinking that somebody else should be taking more responsibility than what actually belongs to them is also not helpful.